All right, hey, listen, we are in week number 2 of Daniel. And one thing that we learned last week is that there is an enemy. And there is an enemy of God. And behind every spirit that you and behind everything that happens, there are 2 spirits that are battling. There's the spirit of the one living true God, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the one who has saved us and rescued us from our own sin and gives us an opportunity to spend our eternity in heaven with Him if we will put our faith and trust in Him. There is that spirit, but then there is a counterfeit spirit, an evil demonic spirit that works behind everything, that has left heaven and come down to earth, was thrown out of heaven by God, came down to earth, and he is trying to set up a counterfeit kingdom. And he is doing everything he can to get your eyes off the one true living God and focus on anything else but Him. And that you and I on a daily basis, we face demonic, evil spirits every single day. And they might not have the horns and they might not have the ugly faces. But there is a demonic spirit that is trying to lead and guide you and I. They are trying to lead people down a path that does not lead to Jesus. And so what we've been doing is we've been unpacking. We looked at Daniel chapter 1, and we're going to look at Daniel chapter 3 today. If you weren't here, I'd encourage you to do a couple things. One, you can go online and you can watch it. So I would encourage you to do that and watch that service. If not, I'm going to give you a quick overview of what took place. Then we're going to jump into 3, because you've got to understand, it all flows together. And so one without the other really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And so the children of Israel had been disobedient, and God had been sending prophets and telling them and warning them, be obedient to God, turn back to God, do what God said. And for 490 years, the children of Israel ignored God, and they were not obedient. And so finally, in God's love and mercy, God disciplines His kids. That's what you have to understand. Discipline is a sign of love, not of hate. Discipline is always a sign of love. And so when God disciplines you, He disciplines you because He loves you. And because He sees and knows there is better for you. But the path that you are taking and what you are choosing is not the greatest path. And so He disciplines you so that you can get on the right path. The children of Israel for 490 years ignored God. And the words that God was speaking, they were not obedient towards. And so God disciplined them by sending along an evil, demonic spirit and king of Babylon and King Nebuchadnezzar. And they came through and they defeated the children of Israel and they took them into captivity. And part of the thing was, when they took them into captivity, they took the best and the brightest, the best looking, those that were leaders, the strongest, the ones that everybody looked to. And they took those people and they set them up so that they could then start to try and change their mind, so that then they could corrupt their mind from the way that they had been taught to now a new way, and a new way of thinking. And they tried to indoctrinate them in the evil, demonic way of King Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon. And there was 4 people, out of all the people who were captured, there were 4 people who said, I will not bow, and I will not do what you are asking. Because we know there is a greater God. We know that there is one above every king, that there is a kingdom that there is a king above every kingdom. And we follow Him and Him alone. And so in chapter 1, what we see is they begin to try and indoctrinate them through education, but then also through luxury. And the eye, they tried to catch them with the eye. And then what they did is then what the king was eating and what the king had in the palace, they started offering that to these boys, these young teenage boys, Daniel being one of them. And they said, if you'll eat this food, we want to fatten you up, make you look good, make you look like the king. And Daniel said, no. That dishonors who God is, and we won't eat it. Give us an opportunity to eat what God tells us to eat. And then let's see, you compare yours to ours. And all of a sudden, Daniel and his friends began to eat what God had laid on their heart. And I can tell you, I would be ticked, because Daniel pushed meat away, steak, all that good stuff, chicken, steak, all that. He was like, no, we'll just do fruits and vegetables. And so then they come back and everybody's like, oh my goodness, you look so much better. So then they make everybody start eating with what Daniel eats. And so now I'm like, Daniel, come on. I want some meat. I mean, that's what makes it good. And so they started, and they took a stand, and they lived that way. Well, now in between chapter 1 and chapter 2 is about a 3-year span. And then we find ourselves in chapter 2, and in chapter 2, King Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. And when Daniel was able to eat this food and everything like that, he put Daniel in charge. And Daniel got a leadership position along with his friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He got this position with them also. And now, 3 years later, King Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. And he starts bringing in his sorcerers and his demonic leaders to try and interpret this dream. And these demonic people come stand before King Nebuchadnezzar. And they say, tell us your dream, and then we'll give you the interpretation of your dream. And King Nebuchadnezzar looks at him and goes, no. If you can do what you claim you can do, and if you are as good as you say you are, then you should be able to tell me my dream and then interpret it. And they were like, listen, nobody can do that. Like, you've got to tell us the dream and let us interpret it. And he said, no. You tell me my dream or I'm killing all of you because you can't do what you said. So they get a little nervous, and slowly King Nebuchadnezzar starts dragging them out and killing them. And it comes to Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were in that group of spiritual advisors. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Daniel. And all of a sudden, it comes to Daniel, and he's like, whoa, where are we going? He's like, I got to kill you. Whoa, why? Well, the king had a dream and nobody can interpret it. I haven't been given a chance. I know the God who gives dreams. And so if I know the God that gives dreams, I know the God that interprets dreams also. Give me a chance to stand before the king. And he went and he stood before the king. And sure enough, he told the king everything that he had dreamed. And it was a picture of the future to come. That kingdoms will fall. And that it doesn't matter what king on earth and how great your kingdom is on earth. But at some point, every kingdom will fall to the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And then we get to chapter 3. And this takes about 17 years after chapter 2. So now Daniel's been in captivity for about 20 years. He's somewhere around early mid-30s because he came in as a young teenage boy. So he's early to mid-30s, and now all of a sudden King Nebuchadnezzar has forgotten what God has done, has forgotten who God is, wanted nothing to do with God, begins looking all around and seeing everything that's taking place, and seeing how good everything is running. And he's seeing all the city being built up. He's seeing the protection that's taking place. Nobody can come in and defeat them. Babylon is the greatest city in the world. It is the strongest. It is the wealthiest. He is providing all this for the people. And here's what the enemy of God always desires to do. He comes in and he taps on your shoulder. And he begins to whisper in your ear, look what you've done. Look what you've done, King Nebuchadnezzar. Look how powerful you are. Look how you've blessed these people. Look at how you're protecting these people. Look at how, because of you, their wealth is exploding. And because of you, man, this is a great nation. Look at you. And that evil, demonic spirit begins to whisper in the ear of King Nebuchadnezzar. And so the first thing that I want you and I to look at today is this. Your pride will always lead to destruction. Your pride will always lead to destruction. And so if the enemy is a counterfeit and he counterfeits everything that God desires to do, and we understand and we see through Scripture, look at James right here. James 4:6 says this, therefore, God says, God opposes the proud and gives grace to the humble. What does that mean? God stands against the proud. That means when pride comes into your heart, it does not come from the Spirit of God, but it comes from the demonic evil spirit that is whispering in your ear, that is looking at you and saying, man, you're good. Man, look at what you've done for your family. Look at the house you've built. Look at the savings that you have. Look at the money that you have. Look at the friends that you have. Look at the influence that you have. You are absolutely incredible. And all of a sudden, what happens? just gets a little bigger. Start walking around thinking, I mean, yeah, look at where I've come from. Look at what happened. Look at, this is unbelievable. Look at what I've done. Look at how many people's lives have been changed. Whew. And King Nebuchadnezzar started hearing that voice whisper into his ear. And he started looking out his window, and that voice started saying, why are you letting them worship somebody other than you? Why are you letting the people have church and worship something other than you? Look at what you've done for the people. They should be worshiping you. You provide security and protection. Nobody's greater than the great Babylon. Look at the city that you've built and the wealth that you've poured on them. The financial security that they have. Look at the happiness that they have running in the streets. They should be worshiping you. And King Nebuchadnezzar, yeah, that's true. And he decides to build a statue that is 90 foot tall, made out of solid gold. He has absolutely zero issue with confidence. Who wouldn't want to get up in the morning and look out the window, and every morning when you get up, see your mug, 90 foot tall. Gum. In the selfie generation that we have today, can you imagine trying to build that statue with somebody? I mean, every time we take a picture, what do you say? Hey, let me check that before you post it. Hey, let me look at that. Let me look at that. Once they start building it and everything, you're like, that nose looks a little big. Those ears are sticking out a little too far. Knock it down, redo it. You never get it built in this generation. But King Nebuchadnezzar looks at himself in the mirror and he's like, I look pretty good. Okay. You need to be looking at me every morning. We have these trailers out here. When we started the church, they talked us into putting our face on them because they said, don't let people just know a logo. They need to know a person. And so they need to know your face. So I was like, great. Well, we ended up parking this trailer out at a friend's house. And this trailer happened to be parked right outside the bathroom. Every morning, his wife would get up and she would look out the window, and there I am looking through the bathroom window. Staring at her every day. Like she would just be like, oh, like every morning. Like she said she never got used to it. Can you imagine King Nebuchadnezzar, 90 foot tall, every morning when you wake up in the middle of the city where everybody can see? I mean, it's beautiful. It's made out of pure gold. And here's what I want you to know. That the spirit of pride is a spirit that is contrary to the spirit that God has placed inside of us. That the spirit of pride does not come from God, but it comes from the enemy. And when you begin to hear how good you are, and you begin to hear the whispers of, oh my goodness, look at it. And that does not mean don't brag on people. That's not what I'm telling you. Like, I'm not telling you not to encourage somebody. I tell them they get a good job, they'll get a big head, and that's sin. Not telling them anymore. You're terrible, you know. And so I'd learned from experience because I started telling my wife, I was like, gosh, she's beautiful, gorgeous, and it's going to make her a big head, and I don't want her to just walk around and sin. So I've been telling her, I've been like, hey, just work on it, you know, you'll get there. You know. How do I look today? Decent, you know. Just because I didn't want that head to swell. I'm trying to protect her. I'm trying to be the leader and the man and just help her out. But here's the thing. Pride is the enemy of what God desires in our life. And it comes from an evil spirit. And when you begin to hear, why? What does it do? Pride always takes the focus off God and puts it on you. Every time. And so what did King Nebuchadnezzar desire? Everybody look at me. I mean, he had to have slimmed himself down a little bit. Nobody's going to build a statue and not have a six-pack on that dude, you know? And so he's standing up there just all jacked and buff, like, you know, and everybody comes out. And so then what they decided to do is they decided to throw a big feast. And they decided that, hey, what we want you to do is we want you to come in and we're going to have a massive party. And we want you to bow down and worship the statue of King Nebuchadnezzar. And they started sending out invitations. They started getting the food trucks ready. They started getting the band. And it was just going to be this massive party just to have fun. And then what was going to happen is they were going to play the music, everybody dancing around, having fun, but then they were going to have this beat, and they were just going to be like, hey, when you hear the sound of the trumpet, everything else stops, and you bow down and worship the one who has given you everything that you've got. You bow down and worship the one who has given you the security that you have right now. You bow down and worship the one who has given you the financial peace that you have right now. You bow down and worship the one who has given you the ability to provide for your family, the one who has given you the ability to let your kids run and play in the streets. You bow down and worship that one. And they started getting it in the mind of everybody. And everybody's having fun, and they threw a massive, a great party, and everybody is having so much fun. And then all of a sudden they hear, it's a good trumpet. That's not my spot in the band. He's going to be back there the whole time. And the sound started. And it's estimated that there are 300,000 people attending this massive party. Can you imagine that? 300,000 people all around. And everybody, when they hear the sound, thank you, King Nebuchadnezzar. You're the one that's done this for us. You're the one that's helped us. You're the one that's saving us. You're the one that's given us a hope and a future. You're the one that's given my kids the opportunity to live in this great and massive city. We worship you, King Nebuchadnezzar. And here's my second thought. Don't worship what can't save your soul. Don't ever worship what can't save your soul. And here's the problem. I think today what we would say is we would look and we would say, I'm not going to bow down to that. I would never do that. I would never find myself in that position, in that spot. Like, I'm not going to bow down to, a big golden statue. But could it be that the enemy's come in and he's tapped on your shoulder and pride has swelled up inside of you? And now what you worship is that paycheck because it keeps getting a little bigger and a little bigger. And you look and you're able to provide for your kids. You're able to provide for your family. You're able to give them something that maybe you didn't have growing up. And so now all of a sudden, could it be taking your kids to sports? And you never picture it as something that, as a pride issue, but could it be as a false god? To where instead of coming and worshiping the one true God, you go sit at ball games and you look at everybody who's out there and you're cheering on those kids and you're telling those kids that it's more important for you to go hit a ball, more important for you to hit a shot, more important for you to catch a pass, more important for you to do the toe touches than anything else. Church isn't as important. God's not as important as you doing this. And all of a sudden you begin to build this altar. You begin to build this statue that you don't even realize that you're building, maybe. Could it be your future and what you're trying to become and who you're trying to become? Could it be your poverty? And that's become a god and a statue to you? To where instead of going and finding a job, you become dependent on others and you found it easy to just go and ask instead of go and do? And all of a sudden you begin building this statue? I would never bow down to King Nebuchadnezzar. But are you bowing down to something? Have you fallen down on the ground and are you chasing something other than God and are you putting it in front of who God is? Don't ever worship what can't save your soul. Jesus is the only one who has come and paid the price for your sin and gives you the opportunity to spend eternity in heaven with him because he loves you. And he cares for you. And if you will put your faith and trust in him and him alone, then he will save you. And he is the only one worthy of worship. He is the only one worthy of praise. And we have to evaluate our hearts and our minds, and we have to begin to think. Because here's the thing. 300,000 people. And here's what happened. I think it's getting better and better, I'm not going to lie. 300,000 people, everybody falls down and worships, except Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They stand. Nothing. Because they had determined before they ever got into that position that they would not worship anyone other than the one true living God. And that when the enemy comes and tries to whisper in them, when fear is all around them, because here's what King Nebuchadnezzar said. Here's the decree that went out. Here's what was spoken to the people. If you do not bow and worship, then we will kill you. I mean, is it worth it? Like, what if I bow, but I don't really mean it? Like, what if they blow the horn, and then I just get down, but truly in my heart, I'm just saying, God, like, my posture may be this, but my heart is, I honor and I follow you in everything. Is that okay? God, I love you, but what you fear is what you will worship. Let me say it again. What you fear is what you will worship. If you fear man more than God, then you will bow that knee. But if you fear the one true living God that holds your eternity in his hand, then you will stay on your feet. And you will know that no matter what I face, no matter what I go, no matter what temporary, no matter what no matter what quick or temporary thing that I may go through, temporary turmoil, it's all worth it in the end. Amen. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego determined in their heart that no matter what they said, no matter what they told me they were going to do, I will only bow to the one true God. And they stayed standing. And they didn't bow. See, here's what you have to understand. The test of a good leader, this is the third thought. The test of a good leader is what the followers do when the leader's gone. Daniel is not in this picture. We don't know where Daniel is. We don't know what Daniel is doing. He is probably away on some official government business because he had that high-ranking position. But he is not here. Daniel is not one of the 300,000 that is bending his knee. Daniel is not on the scene. But here's the test of a good leader. What happens when you're not there? What happens to the people who are following you? You want to know if you're a good leader? Walk away for 2 weeks and see if you come back and it's still able to function. You want to know if you're a good leader? Walk away, and when you come back, the problems will have revealed themselves and you know what you need to work on. And you know what you need to do. See, Daniel was an incredible leader to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Because when Daniel was gone, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did not bow the knee. Parents, for me personally, raising your kids right now is the most important thing that you will do. Period. Period. Teaching your kids to love, honor who God is and what he's done in their life is the most important thing that they can ever hear. And you want to see how good of a job you're doing? Send them out into the world and see how they respond. Send them out into the world and see if when the crowd begins to stand over them, and the crowd begins to shout, and the crowd begins to say, and the fear begins to set in. I know you've seen it. You've seen the people sitting at restaurants. This isn't a far-fetched idea. This isn't something that's crazy. There are literally people, you go to a restaurant, you sit in a restaurant, and mobs and groups of people will come in and tell you to either raise your fist, stand up, support this cause. The difference between the one true God and other religions is this. The one true God does not operate in fear. The one true God does not stand over you and say, follow me or burn in eternity in hell. The one true God says, I love you. And I'm taking your place. What you deserve, I'm taking. But what the enemy always does, the enemy always operates in a mob mentality of fear. Good leadership is not fear. And the enemy always wants to point his finger, and he wants to get as many people around, and he wants to intimidate you. And you will always bow if you live in fear of man and not of God. And so the question is, will you stand? Will you stand when 300,000 people are kneeling around you? Will you stand when the consequence is not just, a spanking, when the consequence is not just, a few days in jail, when the consequence is not just a fine, when the consequence is not just a little bit of uncomfortable, but the consequence is losing your life and death? Your existence on this earth is over. It is done unless you conform. And it's a tactic of fear. Bad leaders always lead through fear. I'll fire you if you don't do this. You'll lose your job. I'm cutting your paycheck. Why? Because they don't know how to really lead. So they lead in fear. Good leaders always point them to a greater future. Hey, you got a great opportunity to do something here. You got a great opportunity, to make a difference in people's life. You got a great opportunity. Good leaders always point to a brighter future. The fourth thing. And so what ends up happening here in this story, those three stand. And everybody's looking at them. King Nebuchadnezzar, you can imagine, it's a 90-foot tall gold statue of himself. And now you can imagine as he's standing there, he's looking and everybody is bowing. And that voice that has been whispering in his ear is now coming true. Look at how powerful you are. Look at how these people respect you. Look at how these people worship you. Look at how incredible this is. Everybody is worshiping you. Then you can imagine there's a guy that comes up and goes, hey, King Nebuchadnezzar, I need to talk to you real quick. Before you say everybody, there's 3 guys who are standing. What? Yeah, you know Daniel? Yes. His 3 buddies, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Bring them here. And what this is this is a power move trying to intimidate them in front of everybody. Now they're not just standing in a crowd with people around, maybe over in a corner where you don't, maybe they don't notice. Now it's you're on stage in front of everybody, standing in front of the king that is demanding that you fall to your knees. Now the pressure gets a little higher. Listen, maybe you can stand once, but will you stand the rest of your life? Maybe you can endure it for one time. Maybe you can endure it to lose one job because of your faith, because of what you stand for. But can you stay faithful and endure it for your entire life? And so now all of a sudden they step up on stage and they're standing in front of the king. And the king looks at them and tells them, hey guys, maybe you didn't understand. Maybe I wasn't clear enough. But when that takes place, you're supposed to bow. And here's what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Here's what they said. They said, "O Nebuchadnezzar," in verse 16, "we have no need to answer you in this matter." Wow. Guys, you need to bow to me or you will die. That furnace over there, the gold that I stole from you, this is what's probably happened. The gold that they stole from the children of Israel out of the temple, he now built a statue of himself with. So what was set apart as holy and sacred is now a statue of King Nebuchadnezzar. And that big stack over there that we used to, melt down the gold so that we could make the statue, yeah, you're going to get thrown in that. Everybody sees it. Everybody sees the smoke coming out of it. And they said this, "We have no need to answer you in this matter." Why haven't you bowed? Not answering you. And they say this, "If that is the case, our God who we serve is able to deliver us from the burning furnace." A fire burns in order to melt gold. It needs to be 2,000 degrees. You cook steaks on about 450. A wood burns at about 300. Melting gold takes about 2,000 degrees. And so they say this, that big stack that you've built in order to melt all that gold, that's all right. God will deliver us from it. There's 3 people, 300,000. It's not like they're going to wield a sword and just all of a sudden just be able to take out 300,000. All right, hey, you get that 100,000. I'll take this 100,000. Shadrach, you sure you can handle that 100,000? I got it. Okay, we're good. God's going to take care of us. Like, that's not what they're thinking. And they say, God will deliver us from the burning fire of the fiery furnace. And he will deliver us from your hand. But then look at verse 18. But. I don't like buts. I like butts. I don't like butt. This butt. Let's clear that up. Love my wife. Love my wife. But if not, look at that. Why not just finish there? God will deliver us from your hand. Come on. I mean, yes, God's going to deliver us. We've been faithful. We stood. We were standing there, and you were just making threats at us. You were coming at us with everything that you had. We were standing there with boldness. We were standing there with confidence. So God is going to show up. But then there's a but. And that but backs up right into this thing. No. But if not, let it be known. But if that doesn't happen, if God doesn't deliver us the way that we've painted the picture, if God doesn't deliver us with the story that we've written, then this, let it be known, O king, we will not serve your God. And we will not worship the gold image in which you have set up. We will not worship your God. Throw us in the fire. We're not bowing down. Even when God doesn't, I'll stand tall. Does that song make a little more sense now? Even when God doesn't, I'll stand tall. Are you sure? Because there is a furnace that Nebuchadnezzar now looks at, and he is fuming because now he thought his intimidation was going to make them bow and fall down. And he thought the fear of who he was and the threat that was in front of them was going to make them collapse to the ground, but it didn't happen. And so now all of a sudden they're standing up there with their chests out. We're following God. What are you going to do? So now he's ticked because he's been embarrassed. It went from an incredible ceremony of everybody bowing down to now he's got 3 people standing on stage challenging him. And so he looks at his guards and he says, I want that thing heated 7 times hotter than it's ever been heated. 14,000 degrees. And he said, here's what I want. He said, I want you to go find a lot of Johnnies. That's what I call them. I just substituted my name because he wanted to go get the big, buff, strong guys to carry Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to the fire. And so I just felt like the best analogy for you to understand what these guys look like. And so they got the big, the strong, the tough guys, and they were like, drag them to the fire. Throw them in. The fire is so hot that it kills those big, strong, bad, buff dudes that are throwing them in the fire. Before they ever get to the fire, it consumes them. Even if he doesn't, I'll stand tall. Even if he doesn't. Listen, my thinking is this. When God doesn't paint the picture the way that you and I like, because my thinking is this, like, God's sitting in heaven. God's on his throne and he is pumped because he's looking down there and he's like, oh my gosh, they've been so faithful. They stood, everybody else knelt. I mean, that is boldness. But then not only that, they were brought on stage and they still stood in the face of the king. That is incredible. So then my story goes like this. Big bolt of lightning, like Thor. All of a sudden, Jesus shows up on the stage, looks at Nebuchadnezzar, takes him out, looks at everybody else and says, you made the worst mistake of your life. These guys were right. Fall down and worship me. Knocks down that huge tower that is, King Nebuchadnezzar, and the story ends there. Fantastic. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are like, yes, I knew it. You would save us. But what about even when he doesn't? What about when Nebuchadnezzar's looking at them and he is so angry and he is so mad and they begin putting handcuffs on Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? And what about when those big, rough, tough guys start dragging them away and they're getting dragged through the streets and they're heading towards and they're looking up and they're thinking, God, now's a good time. God, now would be perfect. God, show up. And even when he doesn't, you still stand tall. And even when he doesn't, when you're being drugged through there, you can still fall down and you can still, I made a mistake, King Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, I'll bow down. And they get drugged through the streets and they get drugged over to where the big tower is. And as they're making their way, the guards get consumed with fire. The thought is the guards, it got so hot and they died that they were probably not able to push them in. The 3 probably jumped in. Because the fire was so hot, those that were supposed to push them in had already died. And all of a sudden they're being drugged up to this fire. Even if he doesn't, I'm still going to follow you, God. Even if he doesn't, I'm still going to follow you. God, you're a good God, and I'm fixing to see you face to face. God, I'm headed towards eternity, and that's what this life is about. If you fear man more than you fear God, you will always bow down and worship man. But even walking towards the fire, if you will fear God, you will always, always stand with God. It does not matter what I face. It does not matter what comes my way. I will always, always stand for who God is. I will never bow to another God. And it drugged them. And the 5th thought is this: your boldness doesn't mean life will be easy. Your boldness does not mean that life will be easy. And then the 6th thing is this: you are never alone. You are never alone. See, what nobody else saw, what people missed. I mean, it's the same thing with my mom when she tells the story about my sister passing away. She passed away in my mom and dad's living room, and for a long time after my sister had passed away, she was 39 and had 7 kids, and she passed away of cancer, and she was laying right there on the bed that we had brought in, a medical bed, and she was laying right there on that. And the family was surrounding her. And for so long, my mom would sit in the living room and she would look over there and she would just see and she would just weep. And it just brought so much pain. And one day when she was studying and she was reading, God said, here's the problem. Because my mom then started debating, should we move? Because it's just so much heartache sitting in the same room where your daughter took her last breath. And it was right there that God spoke to her and said, you missed it. See, you think that I didn't show up. You think that I wasn't there. But what you don't know is I was right there surrounding every single one of you, holding her hand as she stepped from this life to the next. You missed it. See, in those 300,000, they missed it. Because as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood in the crowd, there was the Spirit of God that was right behind them, hovering over them. As they were dragged onto that stage and they were standing before King Nebuchadnezzar, and you wonder, how can you have so much boldness, so much faith to stand? It was because the Spirit of God was hovering over them, and they were never alone. And as they were being dragged to that fire and they were chained up, they thought there was only 3 chained up. But what they didn't realize is that God was actually on the front of that chain, leading them to the fire. And then when they got into the fire, what they didn't realize is that once they jumped into the fire, they were actually not alone. And King Nebuchadnezzar begins to look into that fire, and he begins to look at all his officials, and he goes, guys, what's going on? And they said, what do you mean? There's 4. Didn't we throw 3? There's 4. Because here's what you have to understand. If you will be faithful to God, God will be faithful to you. If you will be obedient, you will stand. And when everybody else hits their knees, and when everybody else starts chasing other things, and when everybody else starts following another God, and when there is an evil spirit that is trying to trick everybody, we take a stand and we say, I am following God and following God alone. You are not standing alone. There is one who is putting his arm around you, and he is saying, I've got you. Because here's what matters. This life is short, it is temporary, and what you are going after, they don't even understand. What you're going after is eternity. What you're chasing is who I am and what I can do in your life. And when you are in the fire, you are never alone. Even if I don't understand, even if it doesn't make sense, even if I jump into the fire, they begin looking around and they're walking around in the fire because you're never alone. God will always, always have your back. Will you pray with me? Listen, here's the question. First question you have to answer before you can get to any of that other stuff is this. Do you need Jesus? Do you need a relationship with Jesus Christ today? Do you need Him to come into your life, forgive you of your sins, and be Lord of your life today? Do you need Him to do that? Because before you'll be bold enough to stand, you've got to know Him. Before you're bold enough to stand up on stage and stand next to the King, you've got to know Him. Before you're bold enough to be dragged by the chains over to the fire, you've got to know Him. Before you're bold enough to jump in, you've got to know Him. Do you know Him? Do you know who God is? Has He given you an eternity that is far greater than anything you will ever have here on this earth? That is worth chasing. If that's you and you say, I need Jesus today, just right where you are, will you just put your hand up right where you are? I need to get saved. Nobody's looking around. Just let me see it. If you're online right now, if you're watching on TV, here's what I want to encourage you to do. If that's you, just right where you are, you can hit that button on the screen, or you can just text 918-22. What's our number? 201-1776. 918-201-1776. Text saved right there to that number, and we're going to follow up with you. And so if that's you and you need to give your heart and life to Jesus today, just repeat this prayer after me. Jesus, save me. Come on, say that again. Jesus, save me. That's it. That's it. I just need Jesus to save me. And so right where you are today, if you've made that decision, there's a card in the seat in front of you. Fill that out. Then as you leave, the generosity boxes are right back there. Drop them in that, and Heather and I want to follow up with you. It's the greatest decision you'll ever make. We're going to celebrate with you. If you're online, text that number so that we can follow up with you. But listen, church, here's the question. Will you stand? Will you stand when nobody else stands? Will you stand when you're walking towards the fire? Will you stand when the story is not played out the way that you feel like it should be played out? Will you stand? Because I can promise you, there's another in the fire. God, give us the boldness. Give us the strength. God, when everybody else around us is kneeling to the demonic spirit of the enemy of God, of Satan, God, we will stand and we will stand firm. And no matter what threat, no matter what fear may come over us, God, we fear you more than we fear man, and we will bow only to you and you alone, no matter what threat comes our way. And so, God, don't let our knees fall and hit on anything other than you, because we worship you and you alone. Right now, would you stand and let's do business with God?